Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Sterling Johnson from Griffin and Strong PC. I'm here along with my co-facilitator for this panel, Ms. Michelle Clark Jenkins, who's our Senior Director of Consulting. We are going to be getting started here shortly, but I did want to let everyone know I see that they're asking questions about whether we're on and if there was audio interaction or only keyboard. For this panel, because we are expecting a rather large crowd, all of the participants in the panel will be on mute. That's why we're encouraging you all to submit any questions that you all have via the chat box or via the Q&A button if you're joining by computer, so that way we can identify all the questions being asked and respond to them accordingly. But we won't be taking everyone off mute just to avoid any confusion on the response options. But I do want to thank you guys first and foremost for joining us today, for taking time out of your afternoon, and we're going to be respectful of everyone's time and go ahead and get started here in the next couple of minutes. Just for clarity's sake, for everyone who's asking in the chat box, can you type into the chat box and confirm that you can hear me? Great, thank you guys. All right, we're going to give it a couple more minutes. I see several people joining us now in the webinar, and I know we were scheduled to get started at 4 o'clock. So I just want to thank you guys. For those of you who were early, I do want to thank you guys for being on early and on time. But we'll get started here in just a few minutes. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started now. I want to thank everybody again for joining. This webinar will be going about, as far as the presentation portion, probably closer to 20 to 30 minutes. We will give a portion in time for question and answer for anyone who might have questions about any content that we're presenting today. My co-facilitator, Michelle Clark Jenkins, is on as well, but she's been battling some allergy issues, so she might be in and out on contributing to some of the discussion, but she is on listening intently and will jump on as her voice allows her to. This webinar will also be recorded and posted on the study website, and I'll demo that study website for you guys as soon as we get started. Michelle, did you want to say anything briefly?
No, just wanted to greet everyone and thank you all again for joining us. As you can hear, my voice is kind of leaving me today, but I will jump in, particularly if I can answer any questions.
Great. So thank you guys again. We're here for the State of North Carolina Department of Administration Disparity Study. I'm sure many of you have heard and received several emails. I know some of you participated with us in our informational meeting session, so I want to thank you guys for joining us again today. So a little bit about Griffin and Strong PC. First and foremost is that we are a law and public policy consulting firm out of Atlanta, Georgia. We specialize as a firm in disparity research, contract compliance work, program development, training, and supplier diversity consulting. We're kind of in the cross sector of the public and the private in a sense. And we're not just researchers or theoreticians, but we're also practitioners in this space. We believe we've got the most qualified team in this entire industry. We've got 4 Juris Doctors, 2 PhD economists, a PhD statistician, and a PhD candidate in anthropology. Each of us having expertise in disparity research, and this is our focus in our day-to-day attention. And no study, and I think this is the most pertinent thing out of this item, is no study that's been conducted by Griffin and Strong has ever been challenged or overturned in court. And with a lot of these studies, usually steeped in a lot of legal issues and sometimes a lot of legal background, that's important to note that we're going to provide the state of North Carolina and ultimately you all as business owners with the best and most quality piece of research available. So a little bit briefly about our project team. Starting off with our local partners, we've got Bridget Wall-Lennon, who's a principal consultant with BL Wall Consulting. Bridget will be involved in our policy review, assisting with our custom census surveys, doing anecdotal interviews, and assisting with organizational outreach. It's a variety of other functions. She's got a lot of institutional knowledge of the DOA and the HUB program operation. She was responsible for helping to establish the HUB office. Originally, previously served as vice president and legislative chairperson of the North Carolina MWBE Coordinators Network. And then she was also the project manager for the last state study. So we're really thankful to have her on our team and assisting us. Many of you all as business owners might hear from her along the course of the project, in various forms and capacities as well. So we want to introduce you to her first and foremost. Also with our team is Gary McCants. He's the president and CEO of McCants Communications Group. He will be doing anecdotal interviews as well in assistance with our outreach to local trade, civic, and social organizations. We understand and we place high importance on the organization's role in helping us to get the word out about this study and coordinating around our outreach. And we put a lot of importance on that, and Gary's going to be helpful in assisting us with completing that function. Gary produced the minority business resource publication called The Black Pages, and also did the Black Expo tour, and that was across the Carolinas and Virginia. His specialty is in outreach and marketing and community relations. He's also active with the state of North Carolina NAACP and chairman of the Greensboro Community Development Fund, which is a CDFI that assists with funding for capital for small and diverse businesses as well. Also with our firm is Deborah Reagan Jessup. She is going to be providing our assistance with our legal analysis. She's currently with the Forrest firm there across North Carolina. They've got several offices in North Carolina. She previously has expertise and focus in some of this area around diversity and inclusion with her role with Wake Forest, where she served as diversity or director of diversity initiatives and lecturer of legal studies. She also was an adjunct professor of business and government and society and business law at the University of South Florida. So naturally with this study looking at the convergence of some of these areas, then we were lucky to have her available to join our team. Also with our study team and getting onto the Griffin and Strong team side, leading this project, and you heard from her just a moment ago, was Michelle Clark Jenkins. She's our Senior Director of Consulting. Her role with this project is as project manager. She has over 10 years experience in managing disparity studies specifically, over 20 years experience in business development overall. She's done over 20 disparity studies. She's our in-house goal setting expert. She's got significant expertise in post-study guidance and assisting with program implementation. As you can see, she's very well credentialed. She's got a BA in anthropology. She's got her JD from New York Law School and a certification in negotiations, as well as she's project manager certified. So we appreciate having Michelle on our team, and she's going to be our day-to-day contact. Michelle, did you want to say anything really briefly?
No, I think you kind of said it all.
Great. Next on our team is Dr. Vince Egan. Dr. Egan's role is as our principal investigator. His function with the study is to do our policy analysis. He's really our technical expert on all things related to our methodology. So he helps to oversee and ensure that our methodology is legally sound and defensible. He's one of the foremost experts in this area nationally, with over 120 disparity studies that he's performed in his career. He's also been a successful expert witness 6 times, going undefeated in those cases, including the most notable for you all being the HB Rowe case, which is the controlling case around program and procurement inclusion there in the North Carolina circuit. He's also a professor of economics at Morehouse College currently, and he's got a JD and a PhD. So he speaks kind of perfectly to the two sides of a lot of this work that we're doing. Our chief statistician on this project is Dr. Ron McGeegee, who's got over 30 years experience in data management and analysis of large databases. His claim to fame, so to speak, is having performed the analysis on the largest disparity study ever done on record for the state of Texas, which included 149 state agencies, 52 state universities, and 9 health science centers. He's also got a PhD in statistics, so he's very well credentialed and he's comfortable dealing with a lot of that large data. And his primary role with this project will be as data analyst. Also with our firm is Dr. Greg Price, who's our senior economist. He does our econometric oversight and performs our private sector analysis. He's very skilled in this area as an applied theorist in economics or economist forensics. He's done over 20 disparity studies in his career and has over 25 years of experience in economic analysis of discrimination and disparity of employment in private sector contracting. He's also the former president of the National Economics Association and is a PhD economist from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This is myself, Sterling Johnson. My role with this project is as Deputy Project Manager, but my formal title is Director of Public Policy. I'm focused primarily on the community engagement and outreach and our anecdotal evidence collection and coordination. I've performed services on several studies at this point, both as Deputy and as Project Manager. And you all will likely see a lot of me there on the ground when we're doing different public events as well. Also with our team is Imani Strong-Tucker, who is our anecdotal analyst. She has done over 20 disparity studies, both as anecdotal analyst or deputy project manager. She writes our anecdotal chapter. So as we hear the feedback from you all in the community, it's Imani who predominantly takes all of what you all are saying and makes sense of it all, organizes it in a way that really tells a story as to what the community's concerns are. Also on our team is David Maher, who's a partner with our legal side of the firm, but he's also active with the consulting side as a legal analyst for our disparity studies. And I'll talk a little bit more about the role that he plays with our legal, looking at our legal analysis and the role that plays in crafting our methodology and things. David is a litigation specialist. He's got over 20 years experience with corporate defense litigation support. He also served as a federal law clerk in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So he's very familiar with the way that the courts may look upon different pieces of these programs and analysis and how we can respond to those things and be comfortable with that in the way that we approach with our methodology and our study. Also with our team is Susan Johnson, who does project administration. She's predominantly focusing on any sort of administrative issues, contract-related disputes, and things of that nature. Omar Baig, who's our data analyst. He's involved in our data collection and cleaning process. He's had a bachelor's degree in computer science as well, and he's very skilled in technical systems and data platforms. Rodney Strong, last but certainly not least, is our project executive. He's our CEO and our chairman, one of the most respected national experts in this area of economic inclusion and supplier diversity. He previously serves as the Director of Contract Compliance for the City of Atlanta, Georgia, and their EBO program, which he was really one of the principal architects of back after the Croson decision. One of his best, in my eyes, contributions to this space is really helping to craft what was the entire field of disparity research with the response by the City of Atlanta to the Croson decision back in 1989. And of course, those actions that he took there with the City of Atlanta really helped to jumpstart the city as a place that was welcome and open to doing business with diverse firms. And that's something that continues on today. In addition to all of those things, he's also testified before the U.S. Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. So getting into our methodology and approach, and first and foremost, looking at this question as to why do we do disparity studies first and foremost. And usually there's a lot of confusion around this area. There's a lot of discussion as to why government entities can't just take the money that they might have used for a study and just actively spend it with more diverse businesses. And a lot of that background is steeped in kind of what the case law has said needs to be satisfied before taking certain types of steps. So starting with the Croson decision back in 1989, where essentially at the time that it wasn't uncommon for governments to run very specific and very rigid quota-style contracting programs, where they essentially were saying that we want to meet a certain amount of percentage of contracting with African-American businesses per se, and that we were aligning that goal by different metrics like population statistics and things of that nature. And so with the city of Richmond's case, and the J.A. Croson Company essentially was a court case that started because of a dispute about the ability of a particular contractor to satisfy a contract award. And essentially that born out of the concerns about different items like the 14th Amendment and things of that nature, essentially created the entire area that we're looking at now as far as disparity research. And really the background of the Croson case with the 14th Amendment and that understanding of equal protections was around how do we prevent discrimination, both whether that be benevolent or malevolent. And so with the city of Richmond's case, that they had this quota style contracting program, and that was based on population statistics and things of that nature, where they were including groups into their contracting process that the courts were determining might not have been eligible otherwise for what this process looks like. And so ultimately the Croson decision led to this case of, or the focus of strict scrutiny in contracting. And this strict scrutiny standing is being something that the courts or cities or local governments needed to meet in order to give preference by race to contracting or remedial contracting programs. The most pertinent thing out of the Croson decision from my perspective, and really kind of stands out to this entire area, is how with the Croson decision, the courts essentially said, well, you got in you all's program in alignment with what they believed was allowable by the federal government, that being the federal contracting programs of the day, where that they had Eskimos and Aleuts who were included in this preference program that the city of Richmond, Virginia was operating. And so when looking at the city of Richmond's program, the courts were saying, well, you don't even have any proof that Eskimos or Aleuts live in Richmond, Virginia, let alone that they've been discriminated against in contracting. And so understanding this strict scrutiny standard really led to the development of two equal considerations that needed to be satisfied by the courts. One being the area of a compelling governmental interest, and two being a narrowly tailored remedy. How do you create programs or respond to these concerns in a way that is not over or under inclusive of different people that might be affected by these programs and these programmatic concerns? And so what the courts essentially said is that individual governments, state and local governments, need to statistically prove that discrimination is an issue first and foremost, and identify the affected parties before creating responses to the perception of, or the ability or the availability of discriminatory action. And so the Adirondack case in 1995 really took that and raised to another level of standard. And that was from the federal side, really taking that strict scrutiny standard and applying it to the federal government as well. And saying that that same strict scrutiny standard that the courts essentially placed upon state and local governments, that the federal government needed to meet that as well in the federal DBE program. And then on the local level, there's the HB Rowe case, which is the interpretation of both of these two cases on the state of North Carolina's jurisdiction. And that's the most recent case that really develops and speaks to the way that we're approaching this project that we're doing right now. Michelle, did you have anything that you wanted to jump in really quickly on the?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think the bottom line of this is, without having a factual predicate like a disparity study, you cannot have a race and gender-based program. I mean, that's really the bottom line of it. And we get that question a lot, which is, why are we spending money on a disparity study? And not only do you have to do a disparity study, but whatever the program is that is the outcome of that disparity study has to have a sunset date. It can't go on forever, because the idea is it's remedial, and so theoretically things have gotten better. So typically these programs have sunset dates of somewhere 5 to 7 years, with a new study being required at some point whenever it would be determined that your previous study is now stale.
Thanks, Michelle. So I mentioned previously about Mr. Maher and his role with our firm, specifically around the legal analysis. And the legal analysis with our study really helps to frame our methodology. How do we respond to the concerns of a court within a particular jurisdiction, in this case, within the Fourth Circuit and within the state of North Carolina? And so we've taken a particular approach to how we're going to conduct that study that's based upon the concerns of the court. Secondly, to our legal analysis is our policy review, which is one of the foundational pieces of our assessment. And we do a detailed policy review that really kind of looks at three overarching questions. One, are policies as written something that present barriers to MWBE and hub firms? Two, are the policies understood by staff? And we determine that by interviews with staff themselves. And then we look at, is there a discrepancy between policy as written and policy as implemented? Ultimately, when we're looking at these policy pieces, it helps us to inform kind of areas that may be eligible to be looked at it with a little more scrutiny to open up the process for more diverse contracting and more diverse firms. And we look at what policies can be modified in a way to promote inclusion for different diverse businesses. And so our overall study process, beginning with these two first pieces, the legal analysis and then the policy analysis, then jumps into collecting and cleaning data. The government agencies sometimes have a reputation for having data that might not be in the best shape and ready for analysis. So a large part of our timeline actually involves collecting the data, reviewing the data, taking inventory of it, figuring out what data gaps may exist, and cleaning the data in a way that prepares it for analysis and gives you clean and comfortable or confident outcomes on the other side. The relevant market analysis is an offshoot of the data cleaning process, and really that's born out of antitrust law. That within antitrust law, it identifies that a marketplace is where 75 to 85% of the offerors are where the dollars are actually being spent by a particular jurisdiction. And so with our relevant market analysis, we identify both a geographic market and a product market, meaning we disaggregate this utilization data and what's being spent by the state of North Carolina, by where it's being spent as far as by the location of the individual businesses that are being awarded contracts, and then also by the product that's being bought. So figuring out that what are some things that are actually being purchased by the state of North Carolina and not including services that may not be purchased by the state, as that might skew some of the analysis. We go from there and to look at our utilization and threshold analysis, which is very simply, where is the dollars that have been spent, who are the awardees of those contract opportunities, and how can we understand, who actually won the contract award. Then looking at our threshold analysis, which disaggregates the overall contracting by size of award, helps us to better understand contract sizing, whether contract size is an issue and whether it precludes participation by small and diverse firms in comparison to larger or non-minority firms as well. And then the biggest issue of our study usually centers around availability, that a lot of times there's a big concern as to who's being counted as available and who's not. There are some people within this field who might say, well, all businesses can be available because they're in business to do business. And that, but for discrimination, all businesses would be more available. But then there are some others on the other side who say, well, all businesses aren't available and only the businesses that are capable of doing work that we identify are capable of doing work are available to do business. And we take a little bit different approach to that. Let me take a pause for a moment. Michelle, did you have something that you wanted to jump in on?
No, just that availability is kind of the controversial part of doing a study, because utilization is what it is, but availability is who are you saying can do this work. And so that's always, particularly in the challenges and in the court cases, has always kind of been the focus of it. And so, as Sterling pointed out, there are kind of varying degrees of, people who are already working with us are the only ones who can work with us, all the way to anybody who has a home-based business can work with us. So ours is, as he said, ours is kind of centered on people who are ready, willing, and able, in the sense that they are certified to do business. And so the courts have said that if someone is certified and or registered, that the courts consider that ready, willing, and able. And then we have to determine at what level of contracting they're ready, willing, and able in terms of their capacity.
All right, thank you, Michelle. And so really a lot of this analysis centers down to a comparison of percentages. And so that availability percentage, as we identify those who are ready, willing, and able, is then usually compared to the utilization percentage of businesses by product area, work type, and by ethnicity or gender status of the business owner. And that's really what constitutes our disparity analysis, that when we're looking at the utilization in comparison to the availability to help us determine whether there are any disparities that exist in that particular area. So for example, if we have a 10% or we identify a 10% availability of African-American engineering firms in the state of North Carolina, and then we look at the spend of the state of North Carolina with African-American engineering firms and it's at 1%, then we've got a simple disparity there, that we've got a 1% utilization to a 10% availability. And so at that point, we have to dig a little deeper to help understand, okay, well, is this number, whatever it be, is it statistically significant? First and foremost, more than likely 1% to 10%, 9% to 10%, probably not statistically significant disparity. And then once we identify whether that disparity is statistically significant, there's a series of other factors that we look at, and that's the econometrics and things that Dr. Price does with his private sector analysis, which is the next step in this, to help determine and equalize for all of these different variables that may identify why a business is competing at a lower rate as other businesses in the marketplace, or for all the reasons that we can explain why African-American engineering firms in this example are not competing for contracts equal with their availability in the marketplace. How can we identify and zero in on what the cause of that is? And so equalizing a series of factors, including items like the education status of the owner, the length of time the business has been in operation, the size of the business themselves, then we are able then to identify and draw conclusions based on race and gender of the business owner. And that if equalizing all these factors, race and gender being the only factors that are identified as contributing to why there are these disparities that exist, then the courts then allow us to make an inference of discrimination, which allows us to raise our level of attention to and our level of available tools into addressing some of these issues, going back to kind of that original concept of why we do this. And so with these two equal tracks that we've done and then we've established on the project, of course, first and foremost being that legal and policy analysis, and then at the collection and cleaning of data, our project really splits in kind of two areas. And we've got our statistical analysis, which I just detailed. And then we've got our qualitative analysis, which is what is the community saying? What's our anecdotal evidence saying? How do we understand, explain, and support a lot of this analysis specifically? And so that really is what triggers heavily our anecdotal evidence and collection. And really that's the part that has the most available opportunity for you all as business owners to provide us feedback. And so over the course of our project, in addition to the informational meetings, which we conducted last week, and we're having this additional session around information. And we also do anecdotal interviews, which is where we sit down with business owners selected at random one-on-one throughout the state of North Carolina. We interview them, get feedback and perspective on their experience working with the state of North Carolina or with other institutions. Then we've also got our survey of business owners, which is the tool that we use both for qualitative and quantitative measures. Is something that also is used by Dr. Price in his private sector analysis as well, that looks at some demographic data, some statistical data, and helps us to better understand the diverse business community here in North Carolina. Then we also conduct public hearings, which is where the community is open to come out to the meetings, hear from us, sit down, talk to us about what their experiences have been on the record with a court reporter there. That's something that we want to make sure everyone knows about ahead of time, just similar to this process where everyone's able and eligible to come out and participate with us. The organizations as well is huge and critical to us. I mentioned that from the beginning, that there are different organizations that serve as a conduit, so to speak, for economic opportunity. that many of them advocate for or provide services to businesses that's designed to help them grow and succeed in the marketplace. And so we want to better understand, one, their role in kind of the economic area and the ecosystem as it exists, and how they interplay with and advocate for the interests of business owners individually. And then we also do focus groups, which are selected at random, opportunities for people to come together in the marketplace, business owners themselves, to discuss their experience working with the state of North Carolina or other entities. And then we do, if all else fails, and we understand that you all are busy individuals, that you've got businesses and families and other obligations that might usurp this particular study or a particular meeting that we're doing, that we're always open and eligible for email and social media comments, that we want to make sure everyone has a chance to participate. Or if you just pick up the phone and call and say, well, hey, this is my question, then we're always available, and we try to be as available as possible to you all in the community as well. I want to make sure that we make clear to you guys as well that with the informational meetings or the anecdotal evidence collection process, that everything that you all provide to us as far as any sort of evidence or perspective or comment, we are not at liberty to specifically hold all of your information confidential, but your information, your name and your business name, we know that you all have personal and business interests tied up into this process, and we will not share or publish the name of your business or your name specifically in our final project. And that's our way of trying to protect you guys while you're providing us with this information as well. And so when we get into the next stage after that, we've got findings and recommendations, looking at the summary of findings. We provide recommendations based on our detailed policy review and anecdotal and other pieces. We look at the race and gender neutral alternatives and race and gender conscious remedies as well. And we try to make sure that everything that goes into you all study is informed by the feedback that you all provided us, whether that be from the community side or statistical side. So we do not look at items related to other studies or other communities and try to make those or overlay those into what you all are telling us. Everything that we do is going to be informed by what you all say, and every finding or every recommendation we make is informed by a finding that we were able to draw from you all study. We also look at coupling together best practices, both established historical best practices, along with innovative approaches to give you guys the most advantageous program that'll be able to support and promote economic opportunity for everybody. And so how to get involved, in addition to participating in forums like these, if contacted, we will also have our anecdotal interviews, our focus groups, our survey of business owners. Please take the time to answer any questions, to pick up the phone and call us, to send us an email. All of those things are really helpful. To attend a public hearing, when those will be scheduled around the fall of 2019. And then, as I mentioned already, to email any comments you might have about the study. And how to stay involved, find us on Facebook. You can tweet at us and follow the conversation. We're usually talking about even just not things specific to North Carolina, but the conversation regarding economic inclusion across the country in general. And then we've also got a study website that's dedicated for this process that will allow you guys in the community to follow along with some of the conversation as the events get scheduled and things of that nature, then you all can access that as well. And so with the project arc, and I saw someone ask how long will the study take place? The study will be, as mentioned in the comments, 16 months long. So we started this process really back in the winter, where we kind of did our kickoff and our data assessment and started our legal and policy review. And now we're in the spring and we're starting off kind of our anecdotal collection process, looking at our informational meetings and our organizational meetings, collecting data, preparing databases, and different items like that. And then goes through the summer, where we do our survey of business owners. We start to run analysis as far as the statistical disparity analysis, continuing our anecdotal evidence, going through the fall into the winter of 2020, where that'll have our private sector analysis, putting together our study findings and recommendations, our draft study report, and our final study report with recommendations. So that is everything that we've got for this process so far on this presentation. I do want to be careful to provide opportunity and time for anyone to respond or to ask questions. Again, for those of who came in late, there is a question and answer box that you can access if you're on the computer, or you can type in the chat boxes. I've seen several questions coming in the chat box specifically. To speak to the concerns of Mr. Zaghetti, The Americans with Disabilities Act is centered on the DBE program, and this particular study is looking at MWBE status and not specifically DBE status. So this doesn't govern the DBE program specifically. There are some concerns, and I see here that you've got some concerns about how people with disabilities were modeled into the DBE program, but I can speak with you about some of that offline as well. I have one question that came in as well. That says, thanks for much study, that there's some who are doing business with the state of North Carolina. They wanted to share a recent experience. So I think the best way to share any recent experiences, whether they be positive or negative, with us is through the email platform. We understand and we know that some people might not be comfortable sharing those types of things in public. A lot of our anecdotal process is selected at random so that we can better infer our responses to the community as a whole, and those being like our anecdotal interviews or our focus groups. So while there are public forums where you can always come and share those stories, if you want to make sure that we know about what's going on and that we're going to be responsive to that, if you send them via email, we'll always be sure to include that in our study record for analysis and be able to sit down with you kind of on that level and hear about what your story specifically is. I have another question here asking, will we be providing data separate of minority women from minority men by ethnicity and race? It has been something that we've discussed. I'm not specifically sure whether or not we have made a final decision on that yet. Michelle, do you recall where we were with that discussion?
Yeah. The main analysis itself is by ethnicity only. However, we are, because we may be able to disaggregate. The issue really isn't whether we include that in our analysis, or we're willing to include an analysis. The issue is really whether we have the data to do it, because a lot of times the data is only by ethnicity and gender. So it really is based on the data that we can collect.
Right. And so a quick follow-up, I had someone ask what was the email address. If you're on the computer and you can see here, the email address is ncstudy, like NC, like North Carolina study, at gspclaw.com. For those who are on the phone, then you all are also able, and I guess the easiest way, if you can't remember the NC study at GSPC Law, you can also access the study website, which is NorthCarolinaDisparityStudy.com. And under the North Carolina Disparity Study website, you can also go to contact us, and there are comment boxes on the home page and on the contact us page. To submit a feedback or email through that system comes directly to this same email account as well. And I'll demo that website for those who are on the computer here shortly. A couple more questions that we have. Will the results of our study be presented to the state legislature, or is this a departmental study only? The results of our study will be presented to the State Department of Administration. I'm not sure exactly who will be in the room, but with that level, raising to the level of the entire state's administration, my presumption is that there will be someone there who represents the interest of the legislature. When we get into the reporting stages on the end of the study, then this will raise beyond just a departmental study only. So this isn't a study of only the HUB program or the HUB office, but of the entire procurement departments of the entire state of North Carolina, which will include both the state universities, the community colleges, and hospitals and other agencies that are involved in state procurement. I have another question here. It says a gentleman is registered as a business in Ohio, but can he still register as a hub business in North Carolina because they occasionally do work in North Carolina? I would ask you to defer that question to, and I believe Alicia Lyon or Tammy Hall is on the conference line as well. I haven't seen them respond lately. But if they are on, I would ask you to defer that question to them. I'm not specifically sure kind of under what circumstances they allow businesses outside of North Carolina to become hub certified. But that's a question that would be best answered from the departments or the personnel who administer the program. We also have a question here that says 70% of hub contracts are white women who are not minorities. And so we'll be able to look at that specifically. Like I said, our analysis will be disaggregated by ethnic status and gender status of all of the businesses in the marketplace that we can identify. And so we'll be able to see whether or not businesses, as we identify them, are non-minority women or minority women, specifically if we've got the data to support that, and then be able to analyze their participation in contracting versus their utilization. So we'll be able to see that very specifically.
Yes. Sterling,
Mm-hmm.
you can be certified by Hub in North Carolina if you are out of state. And I believe John Gunther's is on the phone, and I believe that as long as, I think he's saying, as long as you're certified in your home state.
Right. And so to answer your question, that was really kind of be centered around the certification status in your home state. And so there's a little bit more nuance, and I'm sure that the people with the Hub office would love to talk with you in more detail about that to figure out whether or not you're eligible to bring your business there to North Carolina and to contribute to the Hub analysis and the way that they're conducting the program as well. As a follow-up, I've got a couple more questions. 1 second. And thank you guys for all the questions. It's a lot that are coming in pretty quickly, actually. I got a message from Alicia. Alicia is on the line for the gentleman who was asking about his business and whether he's eligible to be certified. She asked for you all to call her specifically in the Hub office, and her number is 919-807-2330. Or you can call her directly within the office at 919-807-2439. And so she'll be able to speak a little bit more to some of those questions around certification eligibility for out-of-state businesses. Another couple of questions. In HVAC, less than 1% of contracts to African-American companies are going to African-American companies. Will there be a separation of percent awards by skilled, licensed versus unskilled or general labor contracts? I think this is one of those questions that we don't specifically have enough data to support whether or not we can identify someone as skilled or unskilled. I think the general way that we approach some of our analysis usually centers around that concept of availability. And generally, as we identify them as availability, then we will also identify them as skilled enough or available to conduct to do whatever work is being asked of them. So I can't say that with this analysis that we will look at skilled, licensed versus unskilled HVAC technicians as much as we'll look at the percentage of available HVAC technicians in the marketplace as a whole and compare that to the percentage of utilization of HVAC technicians overall.
Right. Sterling, I want to go back and address the issue of disabled persons.
Okay, hold on a second. Do you have the questions in front of you?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions related to disabled persons. So our study, and it particularly relates to the DBE program. So our study is not inclusive of the DBE program for DOA. So it is kind of outside the scope of this study. However, the person, I think there's one person who's asking that question. We're happy to address it offline. But yes, you're right. There is not an automatic, disabled persons are not included in the DBE definition of being disadvantaged. And it just wasn't written into the law that way. However, there have been instances on a one-by-one basis where firms have tried to apply for DBE status based on their individual disabilities. But that's something we can address outside of this panel.
Great. Another couple of questions, and like you guys, actually some really good questions. So one, will the study and recommendations apply to professional services? We will look at professional service categories as a part of our analysis. So it is included in the analysis, and by proxies, because it's included in the analysis, if there are any findings or recommendations that support the use of certain programmatic tools related to professional services, they will be included in that in the recommendations ultimately for the study. Again, I've got a couple people providing us comments in the question and answer box. If you guys have questions or you've got stories that you want us to tell, please email us. Again, that email address is ncstudy@gspclaw.com. I've got it there on the screen for those of you all who can see it. If you email us directly, we do check and look at that study box daily. It allows us to aggregate and pull in all of the comments being made about the study. And then if there is anything in particular that you all want to know about, or you want to tell us about as far as your personal experience working with the state or navigating through the hub office or DOA, then we definitely want to include that. And I want to make sure that we stress and I emphasize this in all of our community engagement meetings, that we're not just only looking for the bad things as well, that we're interested in hearing about the things that have gone well. And things that the state can look at expanding upon and building upon to help make their program stronger as well. A question. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, in the chat room, someone asked what the difference was between a DBE and a hub.
Yes.
The hub program is a state program, and so it has certain requirements as to who can and cannot be hub certified by the state of North Carolina. It has a couple of, unique factors to it. It does include minority and women-owned firms. It does include some disabled firms. So it really is a state definition of that, as opposed to the DBE program, which is a federal program. There are some states who have mirrored the DBE program, but the disadvantaged program has a presumption that people who are members of certain racial groups are presumed to be disabled. But one of the primary differences is there is a revenue and personal net worth cap on DBEs. There's a certain amount of money that your firm or you personally, once you're above that, you can't be a DBE anymore. It also allows non-minority and women-owned firms to potentially be deemed disadvantaged.
Thanks, Michelle. I had a couple more questions come in. Will the recording of this presentation be made available? Yes, it will. This is actually the first time we've recorded a webinar and are going to use it for this purpose. So I'm interested to see how you all in the business community are able to take and interact with it. It will be made available on the study website. That's the North Carolina Disparity Study .com website. And actually, I'm about to pull up and demo for you guys that site now. If you all can still see. Please confirm with me that you still can see the screen with the study website on it. Great. So if you navigate the study website, here in the upper corner, it has the home page, some FAQ, just a little bit of background about the study, some information on who we are as a firm. We know that you all aren't going to automatically remember our names from the first time you've interacted with us here today. But if we get a call or email from us, and you're able to access that, who we are, and just to verify that someone from the team is reaching out to you. The presentation will be under the Info and Resources tab. That under this tab, and I'm clicking on now, it's got links to the GSPC website, the North Carolina DOA website, the study email address, as well as the North Carolina Hub office. So just be on the lookout in the coming days for this presentation and this webinar to be posted here. As I mentioned, of course, here are events, and that's as events get scheduled and things of that nature. And then the Contact Us page as well, which has our contact information, our email addresses, and then this contact box here that you all can use and submit any sort of comments that you all have. This comment box is also on the home page. So if you see here on the home page that you can identify here, just come down, scroll in, put in your name and email address, type in your message, and once you click submit, it comes directly to us. And then here, just an example, informational meetings. Of course, we know we had those last week. But, the information for any upcoming public meetings will be scheduled here, and you'll be able to see it on the home page. There's also a link to our social media accounts, and then a rolling, a scrolling tab here of our timeline, so you can look at different tweets that we might make about projects or upcoming meetings and things of that nature as well. We've got a couple more questions that have come in. What is pre-qualification? So pre-qualification is a process that is applied by different jurisdictions under different types of contracts, essentially, where they basically give some sort of criteria that potential bidders or potential awardees have to meet in order to be determined to be eligible to bid or to perform work on that contract. And so that is a determination that's either set by state law or by procurement law, usually with some sort of definition that, the individual business that's attempting to win that contract has to meet certain criteria in order to be pre-qualified or determined pre-qualified.
Yes, and pre-qualified is handled differently with different jurisdictions. So some you have to pre-qualify, and pre-qualify basically means that before you can bid on something, you have to have already qualified. So typically in a bid, when you submit your experience and your qualifications, you're qualifying yourself as you bid. So you submit your bid and you say, here's what I've done, here are my qualifications, here's my experience. There are some places, for a lot of reasons, why you have to submit all of that ahead of time so that they can say, oh yes, you're qualified and you have the experience to even bid. Sometimes that's done for expediency, and a lot of times it's done, for example, if I've got sewer business, or I'm looking for people who can repair sewers that comes up over and over and over again in the middle of the night, I don't want to have a bid that goes out in the middle of the night, so I may have a pre-qualified group of businesses, and there's another name for that, which they call them on calls, where they've already been pre-qualified and they've already been vetted, and now I can call on them to do this work. So there's on-call, which means I've already got a list in line who I can send out. Then there's pre-qualified, which is, this is a group that is already pre-qualified in order to bid.
We've gotten a couple more questions and a couple comments here. For all of the comments being made, please email them to us. It's easier for us to kind of keep record of them as they're being sent instead of through the webinar format, because I'm just not sure if I'll be able to pull all of those comments out and make sure that we maintain them over the study period. The question here, do we offer a class to teach people how to bid? The process is very confusing. We don't specifically, but from the hub perspective, I know that they do offer several classes. I actually believe they may have just had one this week, or is coming up in another couple of weeks or so. So I would refer you through Alicia Lyon in the hub office. I'm going to type her information into the chat box. So for anyone who's looking to call to get more information about how to navigate the hub process in general, that they'll be able to access that. Give me a quick second.
And I also think it's important that you understand that our scope of work here is to conduct a disparity study. So that's very different than the day-to-day operations of the hub office. So again, as Sterling said, we direct you to that, to them if you have any specific questions about doing business with DOA. But if you have questions, and I saw someone wrote something, I think it's Mr. Goodson. If you could email that, because I'm not sure what you mean by matrix, so we would be interested in understanding more about what you're commenting on, but we need you to do that outside of the chat room so we can get some details. Same with everyone else. If you're making comments, as Sterling said, the comments are sort of lost here in the chat room. But if you email us and tell us the story, and then you can go into more detail or call us, we're open to that as well.
Great. Okay, there's a couple more questions that have come in. Does this study address the issue of minority-owned businesses involved in the opioid crisis, restricted from dollars that the government has issued? I'm not particularly sure how to answer that question, to be completely honest. Michelle, did you have?
Yeah. So if what you're asking is that there are, as the government puts more money towards the opioid crisis, there become more procurement opportunities for businesses to get involved, whether it's, medical, whether it's businesses, psychological businesses, whatever that may be, and that's similar to the cannabis situation that's going on. And so this study, so if you think of it as that is a very particularized, that's like a spotlight shown on a particular area of procurement. Our study is looking at all procurement. So we're taking the big view of, if they're spending, $1 billion, where's that $1 billion being spent versus the fact that there may be, $1 million spent in that billion spent on opioid or spent on cannabis. So we're not looking at those particular industries. We're looking at all of procurement.
Yeah, and I think part of the question would be, how do we identify some of those? And that, I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more of your perspective on that. Because there is, as Michelle was alluding to, naturally when there's government dollars that are specifically designed to address those types of opportunities or those types of responses, then there will be procurement opportunity that results from it. It would be helpful if you're actively involved with the state of North Carolina's process and seeking some of those opportunities, email us and allow us to kind of figure out if there are ways that we might be seeing some of that analysis even pop up in what we're looking at. And so we can make sure that we're mindful of that in the future as well. Someone asked if I could flash Alicia's info one more time. I just typed it into the box there. She did ask that, in addition to her personal direct line, that you all make use of the main office line, which is the 2330 number as well, because sometimes she might be out of the office and she wants to make sure that someone is responding to you guys in a sufficient amount of time and being responsive to you guys.
And don't everybody call her at one time.
Yeah, I know she's a busy person, but I'm glad to hear that, one, that they're here and the hub office is very invested in this and they want to be responsive to this. I did get a couple comments in the Q&A that talked about the hub office overall and gave some very high praise to the hub office, saying that they're some of the best in the business there. So anything that, in addition, like I said, to those bad things, sometimes we hear and we focus in on, those good things are great to be able to point out and take back as well, so we can see where the opportunities are, one, but how the program is being effective and how it's working effectively as well. We got a couple more questions here. Mr. Zaghetti, the ADA information, like I said, I'm interested in learning more about your perspective on some of those things, so please just email them out. I will try to pull all the comments out. I think there might be a way for you to download all of them, so I'm going to just try to play with that a little bit once we close out the webinar today. Question here: will the 2 hurricane capital and contracts distribution be included in the study? We received less than 3% of actual dollars as clients wait for solutions even now. And so a lot of that question would come from where the source of the funding was, and that goes back to some of the questions about the ADA and the DBE program. So the DBE program is applicable to procurements that have federal dollars involved with them versus state and local procurements, or in this case, state procurements that will be separate from federal procurements themselves. So there might be an opportunity where we pick up some of that analysis looking at hurricane revitalization contracting or emergency contracting on the state level. And if we are able to identify those, then those would also be included in our study analysis. But I can't say with specificity what contracts you're referring to and whether or not they would fall within the scope of our analysis.
Right. So someone posted that the disparity study is incomplete without including an economic impact. I'm not sure I agree with that statement, but economic impact studies, a lot of times we're asked to do those in order to convince people that they should do a disparity study. In other words, lots of times we walk into a jurisdiction who's struggling with whether or not they should do a disparity study because they're thinking to themselves, how does this benefit our community as a whole, and how does it benefit the members of our community? I think what's happened here is that we've gone past that and determined that it is a benefit to the state of North Carolina to do a disparity study and to understand where and how we can better the participation, the diverse participation of firms across the state. I think they've kind of taken a step beyond an economic impact study to say we know that there's an economic impact. But yes, they haven't done a specific thing to say, okay, we're, exactly what are the dollars and cents of it. But there is an economic impact on what we do because it changes the face of communities. I mean, the city of Atlanta, the history of Atlanta is very interesting because of Maynard Jackson just coming out and saying, okay, we're going to have this EBO, and if you don't do this and that, you can't have these contracts. This was kind of pre-Croson, pre-disparity studies when you had a little more of a free hand. And because of that, it increased a lot of wealth in minority firms, which also increased wealth to those minority communities and increased wealth to their children and for generations. And the economic impact to those communities also allowed firms to have more involvement and more power and more say-so in, it's a domino effect. So there becomes more equity and inclusion down the line. And even those large firms like H.J. Russell, who started out as, I believe, he was worked with concrete or something like that as a very small business, and he got all these joint ventures in the Atlanta area, became a billion-dollar business. And even as he grew, he brought in smaller firms and mentored them as they came up. So it strengthens the community. So yes, I am a proponent of economic impact studies, but I think we've taken one step beyond in doing the disparity study.
Yeah. And just a couple last items. I know we're nearing actually we're kind of over our time now. That, for people who ask for us to contact them directly, because of the way that we do our anecdotal evidence collection, that we try to make sure that we're not interjecting our own bias into who we're talking to and when we're talking to them. That's why it's important that you all, if you've got stories to tell, that you're contacting us rather than us kind of reaching out to you all on a case-by-case basis. Because some of that preference, so to speak, in us contacting or reaching out to you all first may have a play in the way that some of our overall analysis can be interpreted. So we just want to avoid those types of situations. And that's why we're just making it clear that, to email us directly with your concerns or your comments rather than us going out one by one. Because those opportunities where we reach out first or we contact first are either open to the public for anybody to join us, or for a case-by-case basis, like with our anecdotal evidence or our focus groups, where it is done on a random selection basis. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I know we're slightly over schedule. I know there's a lot more conversation and a lot more questions that people might have. Feel free, like I said, to continue this conversation, to reach out to us, and so we can make sure we're responding. And Mr. Zaghetti, I'm not sure exactly when you're saying what were we looking for. Really, more or less, whatever it is that you guys want to kind of communicate to us and tell us, we're open to having those things. If there are specific instances that you've encountered where you feel that you've been discriminated against. I know a lot of the focus of your conversation has centered on like the ADA component, even within kind of the state context. If you feel that you've been discriminated against on that basis, then feel free to share stories like that with us, or stories about you all individually having received or encountered discrimination on the basis of race or gender in relation to our study as well. Again, some of those positive things we want to hear about as well. But anything really that you all want to bring to our attention as far as your experience navigating the contracting process with DOA is something that we're interested in and we want to explore more over the course of the study.
And this is what's critical here. This is why your involvement is critical. Once we've concluded kind of the quantitative part of this, the statistical portion, and we see what the dollars and cents and the proportions are, then we have to come up with recommendations. Okay, so if there's something to fix here, how do we fix it? And that's where we rely on you. You're the ones who have had the experience, so you help us to formulate where we think the issues are and how to resolve them. You know, anecdotal evidence, in some cases, people see that as, well, that's just somebody's opinion. And so that's true when you have one or two people who've said that. But if at the end of the day, we wind up talking to 500 firms and 250 of them say there's this particular issue, then you have to put more, you count that more as empirical data than you do just someone's opinion. So it is really important. And it's not just issues of discrimination that we're talking about. We're talking about just issues of process. Is there, you know, sometimes the issue may be slow pay. That may not be an issue of discrimination, but it's an issue that for small businesses may be very difficult for them.
Right.
You know, I'm not saying that is an issue with the state, but I'm saying that's the kind of thing that you want to say, what are the things that help you? And by the way, we want to hear positive things. If there are things, I think someone talked about the hub program and it being very good, we want to hear that too, because the state needs to know what it's doing that is doing well and what it is that we need to fix in terms of problems. And this is your opportunity to have an input into the making of policy. So that's why we want you and any of other business owners you know to have their input, because this is your opportunity. Every comment that you make to us, we take into account.
So a couple of last questions, just to make sure that we've got everybody covered before we close out. How soon will you all have access to this webinar? As soon as I can pull it down off of the platform, and we'll send it over to our web developer. So that should be within the next few days. I will probably give it until Monday or so through the weekend, just to make sure that they've got time to get everything done. But I'll send that over to them this evening. And then the last question is, after all the listening, does change really happen? And I think that's a question that's on a case-by-case basis. We've seen clients of ours have significant success from taking the recommendations and the findings of the study and really being responsive to what are the concerns of the community and how they can address some of those issues. One, from a process standpoint, and then kind of within that entire arena and culture of inclusion as well. And so, you know, some clients take that very seriously and they take their studies and they make sure that they put the resources in place and the people in place to make sure that they're addressing some of those concerns, while some others might be less responsive or have other concerns that usurp kind of where the study lies on the entire political policy agenda. So we can't speak specifically to the state of North Carolina's agenda. I do believe from just early interactions regarding this study that there are people who are dedicated to this, that are in place with the state of North Carolina, and that they're willing to kind of see this through in a way that will produce change for you all as business owners in the state. But, you know, naturally there might be other agendas or other initiatives that kind of take precedent with some individuals in the entire legislative process. But as it was mentioned, I know the North Carolina Hub office is very much so committed to this, and we're hopeful from our side that we provide you guys with the most comprehensive study that will be able to address the issues that you all are communicating to us as well. So thank you guys for joining.
So let me add one more thing, Sterling. As we've become a part of this process, you know, this is part of your governor's mandate. It's one of his top priorities. So, you know, the more input and the more this is something from the top down, the more we see change. And your governor has expressed this as an important mandate. So when we finish our work, and our work, the state has kept us on beyond the study and asked us to help them to implement. That's always a good sign that you're not just saying, well, let's do a study and put it on the shelf. They've asked us to stay involved, to help them implement. And when we help them to implement, we're looking at best practices around the country. We're helping them to strategize. We're helping them to figure out where the next steps are to improve their process. And you also have to understand that with Alicia and John and with Tammy and with the hub office, this is what they do. This is their department's mandate. So it's not like some jurisdictions that we go into where, they don't even have a program. They don't have a staff, or they've got one person. The state of North Carolina has put resources towards this. So, I'm very optimistic that as we come up with a plan at the end of the study, that plan will be implemented. So that's why it's doubly important for you to participate as we put those plans in place. And there will be more opportunities along the way for you to have input. There'll be public hearings later down the road. There'll be folks, all those things that Sterling had on that slide, public hearings, focus groups, more opportunities for you to get involved. And even at the end of the study, when we do presentations at the end.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you for the great questions and the great conversation and feedback. We really look forward to continuing this conversation. Again, feel free to email us or reach out to us. We want to hear you guys' stories and perspectives, and be on the lookout for future events and opportunities to continue sharing as well. Thank you, guys, and everybody have a great afternoon.
Okay. Thank you.